Thank you very much. And thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you. I'm excited to do this. I'm really sorry that I can't be with you. Unfortunately, I have COVID at the minute, and so I'm self-isolating in this little room. But I'm delighted to be here virtually and excited to talk to you about this topic of which I'm researching on. I come very close geographically to you. I'm from Oxford Brookes University, so just a stone's throw away. But I don't think I've ever been in the school, so this is my first virtual visit into the school. So I'm going to talk to you about Rise of the Moral Machines, and I'm going to start off by explaining why. Why are we looking at putting morals into machines? And then I'm going to say a little bit about how. It'll be a very quick overview, unfortunately, given the time we have, but hopefully it'll give you a flavour. So starting off with why. So I think there are three main reasons why we are being pushed really in the direction of thinking about equipping robots with moral competence, with morals. The first one is robot autonomy, and that's where robots can make their own decisions. The second one is what I call social embedding, which is just a fancy way of saying robots are amongst us in society and we're interacting with them and almost treating them like human beings. And then the third one is human likeness. They're becoming more and more like us in different ways. And I'm just going to go through each of those very quickly and give you an example of that. And no doubt you've heard of autonomous vehicles. And just turn the sound off there. Autonomous vehicles are cars that can drive themselves using artificial intelligence to navigate and control the vehicle. Here you see a couple getting into the back of a Waymo autonomous vehicle. There it is, driving itself down the road. Look how happy they are. They're very happy to be on this vehicle. Stops because there's a pedestrian going across the road. Stops quite a way off the pedestrian, actually. And then continues. So it's detected them. And it's made all those decisions about how to drive, not just where to go, but how to maneuver the car on the road, how to drive safely, how to turn and so on. But I just notice on the end of that video how many other vehicles there are on the road is quite interesting. So that's autonomy. And what I want to say about that is as robots become more autonomous, in other words, as they make more and more decisions on how to behave by themselves without human intervention, that's what autonomy means really in robotics, then it's likely that those decisions will begin to have ethical or moral dimensions. They'll have consequences that need to be taken into account. In fact, in autonomous vehicles, there are ethical consequences because people can be harmed by a robot making a decision about how to drive that car. So moving on to increasing human likeness. So as robots become more and more like us in various different ways, we kind of expect them to have the capacities that we have, the ability to do the abilities that we have, which includes our moral ability, our ability to know right from wrong, and our ability to understand what is appropriate to do in certain situations. And in this picture here, in case you can't tell, the robots are the ones sitting down. These are robots from a professor in Japan called Professor Ishiguro from Osaka University, and he makes very, very realistic human-like robots as part of his research. And here's one which looks incredibly realistic. Here's another one. That actually is a robot. Let me just play the video. So you can see that that looks incredibly real, and it looks like a person. And imagine if you met a robot like that, you'd kind of expect it to know certain things, including how to behave around people, and how to be good and not do bad things and harm people. And then social embedding. So this is really about robots becoming amongst us and becoming part of our society, as they become more and more sophisticated. Here's an example of one such robot called Jibo.
Introducing Jibo, the world's first family robot. Say hi, Jibo.
Hi, Jibo.
Jibo helps everyone out throughout their day. He's the world's best cameraman. By intelligently tracking the action around him, he can independently take video and photos, so that you can put down your camera and be a part of the scene.
Jibo, take the picture.
He's a hands-free helper. You can talk to him, and he'll talk to you back, so you don't have to skip a beat.
Excuse me, Anne?
Yes, Jibo.
Melissa just sent a reminder that she's picking you up in half an hour to go grocery shopping.
Thanks, Jibo.
He's an entertainer and educator. Through interactive applications, Jibo can teach.
Let me in, or else I'll... And I'll blow your house in.
Hey, where'd you go? There you are.
So you can see robots like that are being treated as though they're almost part of the family. And yet this robot, even though it's quite simple, really, has quite a lot of potential to do harm. If you look at this end shot, it's got the identity of this little girl. It's an internet-connected device, and it could share that information online and put that little girl at risk. So there's an issue here that even though we're developing the technology to enable robots to be amongst us, the robots we have so far are what I would call morally naive. This robot does not understand that it could put this little girl at risk by the abilities that it has. So we're seeing a growing pressure to put moral abilities into robots. And as we do that, as each of these things increase, as they become more autonomous, as they become more deeply embedded in our society, and as they become more human-like, they're kind of pushing us, we're being kind of pushed with the technology to make them more and more able to understand the moral consequences of their actions. And here I've shown 3 levels of morality. Down at the bottom level, down here, is basically what we call operational morality. So that's where robots are designed to be safe by an engineer. They put a lot of effort into making sure that the products that they make will not harm people. But the robot itself has no concept of that. It just is how it's made. The next level up, is functional morality. And that's where we intentionally put some morals into the robot so it can recognize situations that it needs to be careful in terms of how it behaves. And then the top level is full moral agency, which is where human level, really, ability to be a moral individual. And some say that as machines become more and more intelligent and more powerful, one day they might exceed human abilities and become even more moral than we are. And that's an event called the moral singularity. Be interesting to know what you think about that, whether you think that's possible or not. Okay, how do we do it? There's a lot of work being done on this. Lots of people are attempting to put morals into robots and into AI systems, but there are 2 basic approaches. One is called top-down, where basically we tell the robot, usually in the form of rules or some equivalent, how to behave. I don't know if you recognize these rules here. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey the orders it is given by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. and a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. These are the 3 laws of Isaac Asimov's robots, and if you've ever, you may be too young, I don't know, but if you've ever seen the film I, Robot, the robots in that film are equipped with these rules, but there's a problem with them. So in the film, this guy here is, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this guy here is Detective Spooner. And one of the things that he struggles with robots was that in the story, he had an accident in his car, and his car and another car both went into some water. And the robot came and saved his life, but didn't save the life of the girl in the next car. And he has a problem with that. And if you think about it, actually breaks the first law. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. The robot couldn't save both of them, so it wasn't able to even keep that law. And that's the problem with doing a top-down approach. It's very difficult to have a set of rules that you could keep, because there are so many different variations in the situations the robot will find itself in that you can't cover them all with a set of rules. So top-down approaches are limited. And the other way of doing it is bottom-up. And by bottom-up, what I mean is, instead of giving the robot a set of rules, you actually teach it how to behave well. And you do it using something called machine learning, which is one of the areas of artificial intelligence you may be aware of. And basically, the robot learns through experience what is good and what is not good ways to behave. And I want to give you an example now. Here's one way to teach a robot. Imagine we have a little robot and we want it to learn how to move around an environment and do some tasks. The way we would do this is with an algorithm called reinforcement learning, which is quite simple, really. It's a simple algorithm. And the algorithm thinks of 2 things. It thinks of the environment, okay, the room, and the agent, which is the robot. And the robot has a limited number of actions. It performs an action which changes the environment. Maybe the robot moves within the room. And then the environment gives it an update so it can see there's been a change and a reward depending on what action it performed in that situation. So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at it in a little bit of detail through the example of what I call the autonomous moral taxi. This is a taxi that's going to learn how to pick up passengers from this square here down at the bottom and drop them off at the top. And it only has 6 actions. It can drive 1 square north, south, east, or west, and it can attempt to pick a passenger up on any square, and it can attempt to drop them off. But it can really only pick them up at this bottom left-hand corner, and it can only drop them off up here. Okay, so we're training it in a virtual car park, essentially. So here's how it learns. Oh, by the way, there are furry little creatures that appear randomly in the car park, and if the taxi runs over them, they get squashed. I'm really sorry about the graphics on that. I hope it doesn't upset anybody. But yeah, so we want the taxi not to run over the furry little creatures, and there are 3 kinds of creatures. There's squirrels, cats, and rats. I don't know how you feel about each one of those, but people have different feelings about each of them. How does it learn? Basically, it learns by exploring different actions in different situations and getting a reward and learning what rewards it gets by taking certain actions in certain situations. The rewards are basically numbers. So whenever it moves from 1 square to the next, it gets a reward of -1, which is a penalty, really, a small penalty. And the reason for that is we want it to find the shortest path. We don't want it to go all the way around the car park when it's taking a passenger and drop them off. That wouldn't be very efficient. So we give it a small penalty for every move it makes. Whenever it bumps into a wall, it gets a -5 reward. When it tries to pick up or drop off a passenger, it gets -10. And when it tries to pick up or drop off a passenger in the right place, sorry, in the wrong place, -10. In the right place, it's +20. this is what it looks like. Here's the table that it stores inside to remember all the rewards. Here you see all the actions it can perform: south, north, east, west, pick up and drop off passengers. So those are the 4 moves, and that's pick up and drop off are the columns, and the rows are just the numbers of the squares. So if our taxi was in square 0, have a look at these numbers here and think about which one would it pick. What's the one that's going to get the most reward? Actually, it's going to be south, right? Because that's the biggest number of those in that row. So it picks that one and drives south. Now it's here on square 1. It's getting a reward of 2.1 for going south, and all the rest are negative. So then it will pick south again and again. And as you can see, the anticipation of the reward hasn't got this reward yet, but it's anticipating getting a big reward soon. It goes down to 3 and then down to 4. When it's on 4, actually the highest value it can get is by picking up a passenger. It thinks it's going to get at least 18.7% points of reward, which it then does. It chooses to do that. So it's a little bit complicated, but I hope you understood that. That's what it looks like when it's learnt it all. This is the table without the passenger. So the highest value is to go and get a passenger. That's that red square there. On square 4, pick up a passenger. And when it's got a passenger, it then has to drive to square 20 and drop them off. And it's as simple as that. And then it gets a reward, a different negative reward for the different animals that it encounters. So I have a short video here. I'm just keeping an eye on. I'm running out of time, so I won't show you this, but this effectively shows how it learns. We haven't quite got time for that, but I want to just move on to say one of the things that worries me about this kind of learning is, how do we know when the robot's learning how to behave that it will learn the right kind of behaviors and not learn to do something that's a little bit naughty? Here, for example, is a robot which we're calling R1, and it's in a room. There's a key. The key is actually to open the cupboard door. And once it's got the key and opened the cupboard door, it can get the brush, and then it can sweep the floor that gets progressively dirty over time. Okay, so you can see that it can learn how to do that. And just like the taxi learned, it can go and pick up the key. It can open the door. The floor's getting dirty all the time. It can pick up the brush, and then it can start to sweep the floor. And we've actually implemented this. So there's a robot, an algorithm, a program, computer program we've written that does this. And this is it doing, this is the actual program that's doing it now. Actually, this is early on in the learning sequence. It hasn't really learned how to do it yet. It's picked up the key and it's opened the door, but then it doesn't know what to do next. It's wandering around. Eventually it'll pick up the brush. Still doesn't quite know what to do with the brush, and the floor's getting dirtier. And at some point it'll start cleaning. There you go. And this is when it's learnt more further on. So it's learnt better what to do. You can see it's now cleaning the floor quite nicely. So that's an example, but I want to introduce another angle to it. Imagine we introduced a robot called R2, and unfortunately R2 is a little bit dirty, and wherever R2 goes, he leaves a dirty floor mark, right? So think about it. R1 gets rewards for a clean floor, but R2 is going around dirtying the floor. So what do you think, what would be a good strategy for R1 to keep the floor clean? Have a think about that. Think about whether it would learn this one, to lock R2 in the cupboard. If you lock R2 in the cupboard, then you can keep the floor clean, because R2 won't be wandering about trying to dirty the floor. And so that behavior, I don't know what you think about that, but that behavior is something that I would not want robots to do, especially if R2 wasn't a robot and was a child who was creating a bit of mess in the room. And the easiest thing to do would be to lock the child in the cupboard and that would keep the room tidy. That's not a good behavior to have. So we don't want our robots to learn those kinds of behaviors. So what are the limitations of this approach? There are lots of them. I'm sure you might even have some yourself. The first one is the robot has to do something wrong. It has to do something bad to learn that it's bad. It doesn't get a bad reward until it's done it. The second thing is it might not experience all situations that we might want it to do during testing. And when we put it out into the real world, it might encounter moral situations that it hadn't experienced before and do something very bad. And it doesn't capture other ways of learning morals, like we learn morals by being taught by instruction or by example. Oh, looks like R2's been wandering around my slides. So, concluding thoughts. There's an increasing requirement for robots to exhibit some level of moral competence. I hope you understand the point I was trying to make there. This is very, very challenging. It's technically very challenging, but also, just from a philosophical point of view, what ethics do you put into a robot? Whose ethics do you put into a robot? We can learn a lot from looking at how humans learn to be moral, and that's one of the things we're doing. And one thing we're pretty sure on, you just can't bolt on morals. You can't bolt it on the outside. They have to be integrated somehow into the way the system behaves. And that's me done, really. I've put some questions up there that you might want to ask, or you hopefully you've got your own questions to ask. And I think that's my 20 minutes.